Story: The Path of Shadow. Chapter 1. The truck trundles along the deserted road, so deserted that there is no light except for the truck's headlights. Firmly gripping the steering wheel, man lets his black hair down, brushing off layers of dust flying in from the open window frames. The national highway stretches far and wide, winding through mountains, extending deep into the distant hills where transfer stations await the truck drivers. Here, familiar shipments will be unloaded according to schedule and continue to be delivered to even more desolate lands than this highway, along the rugged trails. Crash! Bang! Suddenly, man has to slam on the brakes, the steering wheel jerking sharply, causing the truck to almost tip over. Man slams his hand on the steering wheel, cursing. Damn! Another landslide. Man takes a cigarette out, lights it up, and takes a drag, exhaling smoke, squinting his eyes as he carefully looks around. This place is eerily desolate, a high pass, with a deep abyss nearby. At the end of the landslide area is a fork in the road, half blocked by debris falling from above. Man slowly savors the cigarette, then opens the cabin door and jumps out of the truck to assess the situation. The steep pass is blocked by a jumble of rocks and debris, under a distant canopy of trees. Suddenly, man spots a pile of low stone tablets in the distance, barely visible. Man cautiously approaches, shining his flashlight towards the direction to get a closer look at what it is. Since it's nighttime, the air is very cold. He walks while hugging himself tightly to ward off the chill. The wind at the high pass is different from that in the plains. Here, even in summer, one can occasionally encounter chilling cold that is hard to describe and rarely found elsewhere. Man shines his flashlight in that direction, carefully examining what protrudes beyond the layers of debris under the hillside, only to discover what it is. They are stone tablets for worshipping shrines, specifically shrines for those who have died on this high pass before. The tombstones protrude, tightly packed like a forest of gravestones in a cemetery. The scent of incense bowls has faded due to the long absence of those who lit them, and also because of the weather's influence, making the incense bowls appear even more damp, dirty, and lacking solemnity. The small shrines, temporarily erected by the locals, serve to worship those unfortunate souls who perished on this treacherous pass. Man sighs, feeling sympathy for his fellow comrades, sharing the same fate as him, who died in this desolate and remote place. Out of empathy for their plight, man approaches the shrines, selecting the flattest spot of land to begin his heartfelt prayers. I sympathize with those unfortunate souls who lost their lives here. I am Fung Duke Man, also a truck driver. Today, I happened to drive through here and encountered a landslide, giving me the opportunity to light incense for my fellow comrades. If you hear my prayers, please take pity on me, a fellow sufferer, and bless me with smooth deliveries in the future. If so, I beg forgiveness for the constant fragrance of incense. Man finishes his prayers solemnly. Though he lacks incense sticks, he still has a few cigarettes. He hastily plants them into the soft ground as a substitute for incense sticks and continues his prayers as usual. Finished with his rituals, man stands up, dusts off the dirt clinging to his clothes, and strides back towards his truck, climbing into the cabin and starting the engine. After observing for a while, man realizes that this road has been completely blocked by debris, with no alternative route available. However, beside the landslide area, a narrow dirt path emerges, leading deep into the dense forest. This time, man is carrying a lot of perishable goods on his truck. If he can't deliver them on time, all the perishable goods, mostly fruits, will spoil. If that happens, man will be left with nothing. Going back is also not an option, and the onward route seems uncertain. In the end, man decides to take the risk and drive the truck into the dark, ominous forest path to see what lies ahead. He suspects that this path might be the legendary Trong Sun Trail, a road deeply entrenched in multiple jungle routes to evade American bombs, established by our military to support the southern front line. Without further ado, man urges the truck straight into the trail. The truck's headlights are turned on to the maximum brightness, with a slow speed to clearly see the path. Even though man had traversed the Ho Chi Minh Trail many times before, this was the first time he stumbled upon such an unfamiliar path. Listening to the tales of his fellow travelers on different journeys, they too had encountered landslides occasionally, yet they were fortunate enough to escape such situations by venturing into paths they had never traveled before. These paths were mostly created by our military in the past to support the southern front line, ensuring precise direction despite their winding nature. Opting for such routes may take a bit more time, but they are much safer. As he delved deeper into the road, the dirt trail became increasingly narrow. Instead of road signs, bushes continuously obstructed the path, shrinking its width. However, despite its narrowness, the road was still passable for a truck. Man urged the vehicle along the path, navigating through twists and turns until he finally caught a faint glimpse of light at the end of the road. Ecstatically, he exclaimed, "Could that be the headlights of oncoming traffic on the opposite lane? If so, it won't be long before I can return to the national highway as planned." Elated, man suddenly accelerated the speed of the truck, hoping to encounter the vehicle on the opposite lane as soon as possible. The vehicle sped forward rapidly, driven by man's hope of meeting another vehicle at the bright spot at the end of the road. Thud! Suddenly, something large and black loomed, crashing violently onto the cabin roof of the truck, causing a sizable dent. Startled, man lost grip of the steering wheel, causing the truck to sway as if veering off the trail. After struggling with the steering wheel, he managed to stabilize the truck and return to the path smoothly. Man regained his composure, muttering, "What on earth was that?" He jumped out of the truck and quickly scanned the pitch-dark night. Crackle! A strange noise emerged near the bushes next to the truck. A dark figure slinked away, resembling a wild animal but with a human-like gait. It emerged from the bushes and disappeared into the night, beyond man's line of sight. Man shook his head in bewilderment, speculating that it could be some kind of creature inhabiting this forest. Being nocturnal, it moved through the woods, coincidentally crossing paths with man's truck on the trail, resulting in the collision with the cabin roof. Man climbed back into the cabin, continuing to drive forward. He attributed this encounter to his misfortune. To avoid another collision with a different creature, man decided not to rush towards the bright spot at the end of the road but to maintain the initial speed. He believed that if there was a vehicle ahead and they were heading in the same direction, sooner or later, both vehicles would meet, so there was no need to hurry. He wanted to avoid further damage like before. The truck continued to barrel through the night. However, despite man's efforts, the bright spot at the end of the road remained as small as ever, seeming endless, like an unreachable destination. Regardless of how fast man drove, the outcome remained the same. Feeling disheartened, man contemplated turning back. Unexpectedly, the small bright spot at the end of the road gradually expanded. Finally, a chilling sight unfolded, sending shivers down man's spine. A small, dilapidated hut, barely larger than a haunted house, stood before him. It was a shelter built for the deceased in the midst of this desolate wilderness. Through the truck's windshield, man could see the image of an elderly woman of an ethnic minority, with blackened teeth and sunken eyes, grinning at him with a curious expression, as if seeing something she hadn't seen in a long time. It dawned on man that the source of the faint light at the end of the eerie dark road, which he had always seen, was actually emanating from a hurricane lamp next to the old woman. What startled him was how a small hurricane lamp could emit such distant light, visible from the distance he discovered it. The distance from when he first spotted the faint light to reaching here was at least 7 or 8 kilometers. With such a long distance, how could a small hurricane lamp accomplish such illumination? One point that made man even more suspicious was why, amidst the sacred forest with its poisonous waters, desolate and remote as it was, there could be a shack erected here. Moreover, the inhabitant was none other than a frail old woman, so frail, yet able to live alone here. And in a place full of dangerous wild animals like this. However, the questions echoing in man's mind only made him wonder so much. They merely flashed in his mind and were quickly brushed aside without much thought in the moment. Because for him, the important thing right now was to get out of this road and continue back onto the familiar national highway. This old woman, though a bit peculiar, was better than nothing. Through her, man could inquire about the road. He opened the truck's cabin, stepped out, quickly shut the cabin door with a bang. Then he slowly walked to the shack's door, a bright smile on his lips as he greeted the old woman in Vietnamese. "Hello, I got lost because I had to avoid a section of the highway that had collapsed, so I ventured in here. I want to ask if this road leads back to the national highway again." Man didn't hold much hope that the old woman would respond to him in Vietnamese because she was of a different ethnicity and lived alone in this remote place, rarely interacting with outsiders. So when Man spoke, he also gestured with his hands for her to understand. But to his surprise, his assumption was completely wrong. Because she didn't expect to be able to respond in Vietnamese at all, not only that, she spoke Vietnamese very fluently. You cannot continue on this road, turn back immediately if you don't want to die. It leads to the realm of the dead. Only the dead can enter. If you go in there, you'll be considered dead too. She said and then laughed with sounds full of joy, horror, echoing in the silent night. Man heard her speak with a pair of threats. Not only did he not feel afraid, but he also felt somewhat amused. He thought that this old woman must be Vietnamese, not of any ethnic minority. Perhaps she was insane, so she ventured into this place to live. She must be mentally ill, and her words were evidence of that. Man didn't bother to listen to her ramblings anymore. He turned around and climbed back into the truck's cabin, wanting to drive on. Even though this road didn't lead to the national highway, it would surely lead to somewhere with people. And wherever there were people, it wouldn't be where this mentally ill old woman was, so Man could easily talk to them and ask for directions. But as soon as Man started the engine, the smile on the old woman's lips suddenly disappeared. Her face gradually turned into a cruel expression, and she shouted, "I've warned you like that, and you still don't listen? Someday you will pay for this. The thing you just encountered is a demon living between two worlds. It's responsible for guiding the living to the realm of the dead." She continued to speak, but Man didn't care and immediately drove straight ahead, ignoring her continuous muttering. Her voice echoed behind Man. Until he looked in the rearview mirror, saw the light of the storm lantern gradually disappear. He also didn't hear her screaming anymore. The space continued to sink into the silent night. Man sighed deeply, feeling very frustrated today. Before starting this journey, Man had been puzzled several times. Feeling something wrong, his wife had tried to stop him from taking this trip. But in the end, for the sake of his family, Man still had to proceed, even if all sorts of misfortune happened. After driving for a while, the road still remained the same, stretching straight without an end in sight. The thorny bushes along the roadside interspersed with each other every tens of meters, exactly the same. While Man was bored, considering whether to turn the car around or not, luckily, from far away, about a few hundred meters away, he almost saw the shadow of a truck. That truck looked very familiar, but Man guessed and couldn't remember where he had seen it before. But for Man, that wasn't important. The most important thing was that he had encountered another truck, a companion on this road. He would have the opportunity to inquire a bit about the situation here. Man's car slowly approached, then began to stop completely. Next to his car, there was a truck parked now, a 2.5 meter long truck. The entire truck was freshly painted dark green. However, the headlights were not on. Only this truck was parked on the side of the road in reverse. If Man's car didn't shine the headlights, it probably wouldn't have noticed that it was parked here. Man squinted his eyes, lowered the window of his car, stuck his head out, and called out to the dark figure sitting back in the truck, speaking loudly. "Hey, buddy, can you tell me if this road can lead to the national highway?" The dark figure in the cabin of the truck remained motionless, not saying a word. Man asked several times, but it didn't respond. Annoyed, Man didn't bother to ask anymore, but immediately pulled up the car window and drove straight ahead. He revved the engine and accelerated the car. At this moment, unexpectedly, the person inside responded. "This is the road to the realm of the dead. If you go in here, you can never go any further." Man hadn't finished hearing the answer, and hadn't analyzed the answer. But out of habit, he still politely said a courteous phrase. "Thank you." But after saying that, Man woke up, because the words of the person sitting in the truck were exactly the same as those of the old woman just now. Man was just about to drive and was squinting back at the rearview mirror. Then immediately exclaimed, "Oh my God, it's How." Man had just managed to shout out when his mind felt dizzy, quickly slammed the brakes, and stopped the car abruptly. Ket ket. The car brakes immediately turned sideways. Man's whole body leaned forward, hitting his head on the car window. He was horrified, then stunned, hastily sticking his head out of the truck's cabin window to look back at the truck behind to check carefully. But strangely, the truck had disappeared without a trace now. It was as if it hadn't been there before. And the engine wasn't running. Man didn't see it leave from where it was just now. So why did a huge truck like that disappear in the blink of an eye? Another thing that made man even more frightened. That was the voice, that sound, and precisely that figure. Man could recognize who that person was. It was Hao, Din Sun Hao, a fellow villager of Man's. When Man had just joined the truck driver not long ago, went with Hao a few times, then the last Tet border trade trip. Hao's dark green truck was overturned. Both he and the truck fell into the ravine. Hao was dead. But the green truck just now, how terrifying it was, because Man recognized that it was the truck that he had had the opportunity to ride with Hao a few years ago and sat on it. The characteristics of that truck Man still remembered very clearly because Hao was meticulous and careful, his truck always shiny bright. Especially the cabin window was always slightly open for Hao to smoke, along with the truck bed dented on the right side due to collision. One more horrifying thing was that before Man felt dizzy and overwhelmed by the very familiar voice. Then he suddenly remembered the dark shadow sneaking out of the car window, revealing a very familiar grey face, which was Mr. Hao. This was the first time Man felt so scared. Originally a courageous person, Man had never known what fear of ghosts was before. But perhaps after this time, he had to feel really scared. Man didn't dare to stop any longer. He quickly started the engine and accelerated straight out of this place. Driving a bit further, Man suddenly noticed another strange car. This car was also very strange in that Man felt as if he had been there before. Yes, a very familiar feeling surged in his memory. Suddenly he startled. The terrible things echoed in his head. Oh my God, this is Than's car. He remembered, that year he and Than, his same-age friend, had a batch of goods transported over the pass, exactly where those temples collapsed before. Then they encountered a big storm. The slippery road made the road surface full of stones, and the car couldn't grip the road. The entire car that the two of them were driving plunged into the ravine. Man managed to escape before the car fell into the ravine, luckily still alive. But Than was not so lucky. He was crushed to death by the truck, and when his family came to collect his body for burial, it was just a bunch of bloody flesh mixed with his bones. Seeing the car, remembering the terrible scenes of the past, made Man too scared to stay any longer. Although initially he intended to stop for a moment to ask for directions, because he encountered another car, but unexpectedly it was a scene similar to when he encountered Mr. Hao. Man drove faster, thinking he would escape the horror. But no matter how fast he drove, just in a blink of an eye, he suddenly saw them standing on the side of the road, with a mutilated face. His mouth grinned with rotten flesh. Laughing disgustingly, he said, "Man, why did you let me die alone? Die with me." That voice echoed in Man's head, making him sweat and unable to focus on driving anymore. He kept driving and driving, but didn't see the end of this road at all. What was even more terrifying was that one by one, the familiar cars whose owners had died, the familiar fellow villagers of Man who had died because of the collapsed pass, kept appearing, causing Man to be horrified again and again. Man felt so horrified. Remembering the warning of the old woman, he immediately thought that perhaps it was true. This road, not wrong, was indeed the road of the dead. It was a road for the dead, permanently without a starting point or an ending point, only meeting dead souls on it, unable to meet the living. Man was desperate. His head bowed down to the steering wheel, the wheels stopped, he cried desperately and prayed for the heavens and the earth to let him escape from this road. Just when Man was desperate to the point of almost giving up. At this exact moment, a very familiar, very creepy voice echoed. "Well, have you seen it yet? I've warned you. This is the consequence you deserve for being so stubborn. The punishment is for someone to live forever lost in the world of the dead." Man quickly turned to look. He discovered that it was the old woman again. She had been sitting right next to the passenger seat in the cabin. Her chilling voice echoing made Man shudder. Man angrily, madly reached out to grab the old woman's collar and shouted, "You old hag, tell me quickly, what can I do? How can I get out of here?" The old woman laughed wickedly. She didn't care about Man's hand squeezing her neck tightly. Instead, she still spoke as usual. Man felt that she seemed to not breathe. Perhaps she was also a dead ghost. She said, "You realize everything too late, blaming you for not listening to my warning. But today is a lucky day for you. I am a demon guarding the road of the dead, in need of a gift from you. Something for exchange, anything to exchange for your life. Man shouted. You old witch, release me from here quickly. Man's eyes turned red with anger, he gritted his teeth and tightened his grip on her neck. But it seemed that she was not affected at all, and she continued to talk as usual. She laughed mockingly and said, "Stop it. Thinking about killing a demon with your rotten, bare hands?" She suddenly lightly pushed her arm against Man's hand. Man suddenly felt a great force pushing his hand. He was surprised that her thin, weak-looking hands could be so strong. She pushed Man's hand away, then she completely stopped smiling. Her face suddenly became serious. She shouted, "Enough. This is your last chance. The choice is yours. Must be something very important to you. Whether it's your wife, your eldest daughter, your second child, or your parents. Must be someone who has died for you to choose. The younger the person chosen, the longer the time to repay the debt, the older the person, the faster the repayment." Man turned to look at the old woman with a pensive expression. Wife, daughter, each one was immeasurable. But in the end, he just wanted this nightmare to end quickly. He quickly blurted out, "If possible, make my eldest daughter disappear, she's really an annoying child." But as soon as Man finished speaking, he immediately felt regret. He quickly corrected himself. "That's what I said if." But that was more than enough for the old woman. She laughed triumphantly and disappeared like vapor, leaving only her voice echoing. "Contract accepted. What's exchanged is your daughter. 20 years later, I will come to collect your debt, the debt of your life. Remember, you can't break a promise with a demon guarding the road to the underworld." The voice ended. Man's eyes flashed with tears. Then he saw in the distance the edge of the national highway appear, only about a kilometer away. He rejoiced, immediately speeding up and forgetting about what had just happened. After that trip, Man returned safely, albeit late, but luckily the collapsed land had been cleared by the authorities very early, so he still managed to deliver the goods to his partners. Finally, Man returned home and quickly forgot about the story of the Road of the Dead. Chapter 1 ended here. See you again in Chapter 2, which will be released tomorrow.
Hopefully the content has brought you interesting and meaningful moments. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the Ghost Stories YouTube channel to follow the channel's next videos. See you in the next video. Have a good day.